There have been two core assumptions underlying the way that spectrum has been allocated in the United States. This is from former FCC Chairman Michael Powell. The first is, unregulated radio interference can lead to chaos. According to Powell, it would be wrong to leave radio stations or any user of wireless on their own. What will happen is they will eventually interfere with each other. Then the spectrum becomes valueless. Powell is looking at externalities of spectrum. The second of Powell's assumptions is government command and control of scarce spectrum is the only way chaos can be avoided. Remember, this is a point of view. It's an opinion. This is the FCC chairman in 2002 indicating that the way to control spectrum was through command and control. It should be the government who commands the spectrum and who controls who uses it and how they use it, according to Powell. Today's environment has really strained Powell's core assumptions to the breaking point. The main driving force behind research and spectrum management is the allocation of man-made spectrum scarcity. A great deal of what the engineers over the past 20 years have tried to do is to alleviate spectrum scarcity by allowing us to pack more into a smaller space in the spectrum and to make more parts of the spectrum available than were previously available. That only happens when there's some competition. Most of the spectrum historically in the United States and elsewhere has been allocated by government. Even in the license bands that are busy, the level of activity sometimes varies widely with time of day, geographic location. Some particular bands are very busy. Other bands are almost like a desert in terms of activity. There are large amounts of spectrum that are allocated to emergency uses, but emergency services use these bands only intermittently. When the spectrum is awarded to a particular industry or a particular firm or a particular government agency, it's secure. Nobody can take it away, and that means that the people who use it have no incentive to use it more efficiently or more economically. They don't have any incentive to improve on the amount of information that can be handled by their particular slot in the spectrum. But consider the case of unlicensed spectrum. Some spectrum is unlicensed. The government probably thought the frequencies were unusable and therefore unimportant. In the field of unlicensed bands, necessity has really resulted in some groundbreaking research, some of which you've heard about from our engineers. A good example of that is Wi-Fi. In fact, you probably are watching this from a device that may be connected to broadband through Wi-Fi. If you are, you're the recipient of a great deal of engineering prowess. Wi-Fi has improved over the years. It's gotten more reliable. It's gotten faster. It's able to cover greater distances. There was a low cost of entry in getting into Wi-Fi because Wi-Fi was unlicensed. Anybody could use it. You don't have to pay for the spectrum. It cost $0 to use the spectrum because it was unlicensed. This encouraged the amount of use that we see today in Wi-Fi. It's in every Starbucks, every McDonald's, it's on every college campus, and it's worldwide. Wi-Fi has become a technological tour de force of engineering, as new versions of Wi-Fi lead to innovative solutions to the scarcity problem. Unlicensed bands like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and near-field communications breed a great deal of innovation. And the reason is because people can use them freely, and the better they can use them, the more money they can make. Traditional ideas of network infrastructure and ownership of spectrum following a government model of treating spectrum like a public carrier ought to be challenged. We need to think about spectrum differently than we have about spectrum in the past. Spectrum auctions are only one way of attacking spectrum scarcity. Remember that we talked about the Coase theorem and the idea that if you make spectrum, or at least pieces of the spectrum, private property, what you're going to do is you are actually going to be creating a system that's going to breed a great deal of innovation and competition. But wireless regulations in most countries have actually changed very little since the 1930s. In the United States, things are changing. A recent spectrum auction actually surprised even economists in terms of the amount of money that was brought in. The spectrum was worth tens of billions of dollars. That's cash actually paid to the government. The spectrum sold was worth more than many industries in the United States are worth.